I returned from Singapore after 10 years apart, dreaming of surprising my daughter Hannah and meeting my 4-year-old granddaughter Grace in the beautiful Denver home I bought them. But as I quietly turned my key in the front door, I heard my son-in-law's voice cut through the silence. "Clean that mess up faster or you'll get another beating tonight." I froze. Through the doorway, I saw Hannah on her hands and knees picking up shattered dishes with trembling fingers, wearing a dirty apron that read Hamilton Family Property. They dared to treat my daughter like this. I would make them pay. My name is Jacob Bennett, and this is the story of how I stood up to protect my little girl. Before I share this powerful story about family and justice, if you are watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story from. I want to know how far it has reached. 10 years of working in Singapore's tech industry has been worth every sleepless night. I'd built data centers under that relentless tropical sun and saved every dollar, all for this moment. Coming home to surprise Mara and finally meet Lily face to face. The streets of Denver looked exactly the same as my taxi stopped in front of the house on Cherry Creek Drive. Same red brick walls, same white picket fence, same old oak tree where Mara used to climb. It was the house I'd bought for her before leaving for Singapore, my way of making sure she always had a safe home. I stood on the sidewalk, hands shaking a little as I took out my key. Mara had no clue I was coming. This was supposed to be the surprise of her life. The front door opened without a sound. I stepped in, smiling, ready to shout, "Surprise!" But the word froze in my throat when I heard a man's voice coming from the living room. "Clean that mess up faster or you'll get another beating tonight." My blood went cold. Through the hallway, I saw Mara on her hands and knees, scrubbing vomit off the wooden floor. She had on a filthy apron with words that made me sick: Porter Family Property. My daughter, labeled like she belonged to them. Suddenly, Caleb's entire expression flipped. His face shifted from pure cruelty to a bright, artificial smile as he walked toward me with open arms. "Dad, welcome home," he said warmly, the tone clearly fake. What an amazing surprise. Mara was just helping with some chores. You know how she is, always wanting to pitch in. Mara stood up fast, quickly untying the humiliating apron and shoving it behind a couch cushion. Her movements were rushed, nervous. "Dad," she said, forcing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I'm fine. Just tired." A tiny figure peeked from behind Mara's legs. Lily, seeing me in real life for the first time. Her wide brown eyes stared at me with a mix of curiosity and fear. "Mommy," Lily whispered. "Who is that man?" The words hit me like a punch. Despite our video calls, I was still a stranger to her. I crouched down, keeping my voice gentle even though everything inside me churned. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm your grandpa, Marcus. Remember me from the video calls? I've been working far away, but now I'm here to see you and your mom." Lily buried her face in Mara's leg, overwhelmed. Mara placed her hand protectively on her daughter, and that's when I noticed it, a dark purple bruise circling Mara's forearm. "Mara," I began, but she yanked her sleeve down quickly, giving me a look that clearly said, "Not now." Caleb slapped a hand on my shoulder, too familiar, a warning hidden in his eyes. "She's been a little clumsy lately," he said with a hollow laugh. "You know women, always bumping into things." Something was terribly wrong. The confident girl I had raised was now a terrified shell of herself, constantly seeking her husband's reaction. And my granddaughter, who should have run into my arms, hid as if I were dangerous. Standing in the middle of what should have been a joyful reunion, one thought cut through everything with painful clarity. I had to find out what had happened to my family. And I knew the truth would be far worse than anything I imagined. 3 hours later, I finally had the chance. Caleb left for a business meeting, though the stench of whiskey said otherwise. Lily was asleep, and without him there, the house felt completely different. Mara sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. In the afternoon light, the bruises stood out even more, not just on her arms, but grip marks around her wrists. "Mara," I said quietly, pulling up a chair. "Tell me about those bruises. Don't say you're clumsy. I raised you. You were the most coordinated kid in the neighborhood." She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. It's nothing, Dad. Just work accidents. I've been doing physical tasks, helping with renovations. Her voice shook as she looked away. This wasn't the same daughter who used to debate politics at Sunday dinner. I held her hand gently. Mara Elise Porter, I said, using her full name like when she was little. Remember what I promised the day you were born? I'd always protect you. That promise isn't gone. The dam broke. Her face crumpled as tears poured down. She folded into me like the frightened girl she'd turned into. "Oh, Daddy," she cried, using the childhood name. "I messed up so badly. After Lily was born, I got sick. Really sick, up here." She tapped her temple. "The doctor said it was postpartum depression. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't take care of Lily. Caleb's family said they'd handle everything while I got better." She wiped her face, her voice falling to a whisper. "I was on strong medication, Dad. Everything was blurry. I couldn't think straight. They kept giving me papers to sign, insurance forms, medical authorizations, they said. I signed everything because I trusted them." My heart shattered watching her relive it. "What kind of papers?" I asked softly. "Property transfer documents. Power of attorney forms." Her eyes filled again. "They said it was temporary, just until I recovered. But when the fog lifted and I understood what I'd signed," she glanced around the kitchen that should have been hers, "they told me I'd signed the house over. That I was now their live-in caregiver, working off the debt of their help." Rage burned inside me like fire. They had preyed on her at her most vulnerable. They said if I disobeyed or tried to leave, they'd claim I was unfit and take Lily away, she whispered. So I stayed. I've been their servant in my own home for 3 years, Dad. She walked to a drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. I kept everything. Medical files, the papers I signed. All of it. I kept hoping someday someone would help me understand what really happened. As I opened that folder, one thought echoed loud and unstoppable. They made the worst mistake of their lives when they decided to destroy Marcus Porter's daughter. That night, I spread Mara's medical records across the kitchen table like a detective working a case. What I found made my blood run cold. The dates told a story of systematic exploitation far worse than anything I had expected. Mara had signed the property transfer documents on March 15th. According to her medical chart, that same day her psychiatrist had raised her antidepressant dosage to its highest level because of a severe psychological episode. The next morning, I drove straight to Denver General Hospital, where Mara had received treatment. Dr. Elaine Porter, her former psychiatrist, agreed to meet with me after I explained what was happening. "Mr. Porter," Dr. Porter said, pulling Mara's thick file from her cabinet. "I remember your daughter very clearly. Her case was one of the most severe postpartum depression episodes I've ever treated." She flipped through several pages of notes, her expression growing more troubled. During March of that year, Mara was barely functional. We had her on sertraline, lorazepam, and quetiapine, very strong medications that heavily impair cognitive function and the ability to make decisions. "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "It means she was in absolutely no condition to make any legal decisions," Dr. Porter said. "The medication levels we prescribed would have left her confused, disoriented, and highly suggestible. She shouldn't have been signing birthday cards, let alone property documents." Dr. Porter called in Nurse Emily Rhodes, the nurse who had worked closest with Mara. Emily's face darkened the moment she heard what had happened. "Oh my God," Emily said, shaking her head. "I remember those weeks like they were yesterday. Mara was so heavily medicated that some days she couldn't even recognize her own mother when she came to visit. She would look at people like she was staring through fog. I vividly remember one afternoon when she tried signing her name on a get-well card from her church group," Emily said. "Her handwriting was so shaky and unreadable that we literally had to guide her hand. There's no way she could have understood complicated legal paperwork." Dr. Porter pulled out Mara's medication log and pointed at the dates with her pen. "Look at this timeline, Mr. Porter. March 10th through March 20th was her absolute worst period. We were on the verge of hospitalizing her because she was barely responsive to simple instructions. And they had her sign legal papers during this time? I asked, my voice tight with rage. If what we're telling you is accurate, then what they did wasn't just immoral, Dr. Porter said firmly. It was legally invalid. A person under this level of psychiatric medication cannot give informed consent for anything, especially something as significant as transferring property. Emily nodded hard. I'd testify to that in court. Mara couldn't even understand what day it was, let alone that she was giving away her home. Dr. Porter handed me a printed summary of Mara's treatment during that time. Mr. Porter, those signatures have no legal value. No court would uphold contracts signed by someone in her condition. What the Prescott family did qualifies as exploitation of a vulnerable adult. As I walked out of the hospital with that summary in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time since stepping into that house, I knew we actually had a chance. The Prescott family thought they were smart, taking advantage of a sick woman. But they had just given me exactly what I needed to bring them down. With Dr. Porter's medical summary, I knew I needed professional help. A quick online search led me to the law offices of Webster & Associates, specialists in elder abuse and exploitation cases. Caroline Webster was known for taking down influential families who preyed on vulnerable people. Her downtown Denver office sat on the 15th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Caroline herself looked to be in her early 50s, her silver hair tied back sharply, her eyes sharp and analytical. "Mr. Porter," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her polished desk, "tell me everything about your daughter's situation. Don't skip any details." I told her everything. The degrading apron, Mara's postpartum depression, the suspicious timing of the signatures, and Dr. Porter's medical findings. Caroline took notes on a yellow legal pad, stopping only to ask precise questions about dates and witnesses. When I finished, she leaned back, tapping her pen against her lips. "Mr. Porter, this is textbook exploitation of a vulnerable adult. What the Prescott family did isn't just morally disgusting, it's a federal offense." She spread out Mara's medical records on her desk, comparing them with the photocopies of the property transfer documents. "Just look at this timeline. Your daughter signed away a $400,000 home while she was so heavily medicated she literally couldn't recognize her own mother. Any first-year law student could get these contracts voided." "But that's not all," Caroline continued, her voice sharpening with a predatory tone. "The Prescotts didn't stop at fraud. They established an ongoing pattern of abuse, forcing her to wear that apron, making her work as an unpaid servant, threatening to take her child. That qualifies as human trafficking, Mr. Porter." My heart pounded as the full scale of what Mara had endured finally settled in. "What can we do?" "We're not just getting your daughter's house back," Caroline said confidently. "We're putting the Prescott family behind bars. But we have to be smart about how we do it." She pulled out a clean legal pad and started outlining the plan. Step 1. Give them 48 hours to return the property and pay damages. "Some families panic and settle once they realize they're cornered," she said. Step 2. If they refuse, we file civil and criminal complaints at the same time. Civil to recover the house and damages. Criminal to refer the case to the FBI for human trafficking and exploitation. Step 3. I asked. "We contact the Denver Post," she replied. "Public pressure works wonders on families obsessed with their reputation." And Step 4. Caroline's smile was anything but kind. "Step 4 is where we finish them. Asset forfeiture, prison sentences, and civil judgments that will wipe them out for generations." She stood and extended her hand. "Mr. Porter, I've practiced law for 25 years, and I've never seen evidence this strong. The Prescott family chose the wrong target when they went after your daughter." "What do we do first?" I asked, shaking her hand. "Tomorrow morning, you and I will visit them. We'll give them the chance to surrender quietly. If they have any sense, they'll take it." Her eyes glinted with anticipation. "If they don't, they'll learn what happens when someone harms Marcus Porter's family." Walking out of her office, I felt stronger than I had in years. The Prescotts were about to learn that their real mistake wasn't exploiting my daughter, it was doing it while her father was still alive. The next morning, Caroline and I drove through the gates of the Prescott estate in Cherry Hills Village. The mansion towered over the grounds, 3 stories of Colorado sandstone and massive columns built on other people's suffering. A butler led us down marble hallways lined with portraits of Prescott ancestors. Gerald Prescott waited in his mahogany study, seated behind an enormous desk. He looked to be in his 70s, with silver hair and the soft features of someone raised on privilege. "Mr. Porter," he said without standing, voice dripping condescension. "I understand you have complaints about your daughter's living arrangement. Mara is perfectly content working for our family." "Working?" I said, anger contained but obvious. "You mean being your unpaid servant in her own home?" Gerald laughed coldly. "You're nobody, Porter. My family has run this city for 4 generations. We have judges, politicians, and police commissioners in our pocket. You think one old man can threaten us?" Caroline stepped forward, placing a thick folder on his desk. "Mr. Prescott, I'm attorney Caroline Webster. These are your daughter-in-law's medical records from Denver General, along with her psychiatrist's testimony." She opened the folder deliberately. On March 15th, Mara signed property documents while on maximum-dose psychiatric medication. Dr. Elaine Porter confirmed she was so impaired she couldn't recognize her own mother. Gerald barely glanced at the file. Mara signed willingly. "We have witnesses." "You exploited her mental illness," I said, leaning toward him. "That's a federal offense: human trafficking, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud." A flicker of doubt crossed Gerald's face. He picked up the records, his confidence wavering as he read Dr. Porter's assessment. "This is outrageous," he muttered, though his voice lacked strength. "Mara needed help. We gave her help. She's grateful." Caroline's smile turned predatory. "Grateful? Is that why she wears an apron labeled Prescott family property? Why your son threatens to beat her?" Gerald's face flushed crimson. "How dare you come into my home with these accusations? I'll have you arrested for harassment." "Call the police," Caroline said coolly. "I'd love to explain how your family kept a mentally ill woman as an unpaid servant for 3 years. Caleb stormed in, face twisted with rage. "Dad, why are we even talking to these people? Let me deal with this the way we deal with everything." Caroline didn't react to the threat. "Mr. Prescott, you have 48 hours to return Mara's house and pay $1 million in damages. If you refuse, we'll file civil and criminal charges with the FBI." Gerald stood slowly, his hands shaking with fury. "You just declared war on the wrong family, Porter. We'll destroy you and that broken daughter of yours." "You already tried," I said, rising to face him. "But you made one fatal mistake. You left me alive." As we walked out, Caroline squeezed my arm. "Perfect. They just made threats in front of witnesses. Now we can add intimidation charges." The Prescotts had 48 hours to surrender. My gut told me they wouldn't. 47 hours later, their silence told Caroline everything she needed. The Denver Post's front page blazed. "Wealthy family exploits daughter's mental illness to steal home." The article by investigative reporter Maria Reyes detailed everything. Mara's medical records, the suspicious timing, the humiliating treatment she'd endured for 3 years. A photo showed our modest house on Cherry Creek Drive beside the Prescott mansion, a perfect David and Goliath scene. Within hours, the story exploded online. #Justice for Mara trended on Twitter as thousands shared their own stories of abuse and exploitation. Local news crews surrounded both our home and the Prescott estate. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, knocked on our door with a casserole and tears in her eyes. "Marcus, I had no idea what Mara was going through. Everyone's talking about it. We all want to help." Support poured in from everywhere. A GoFundMe popped up overnight to help with Mara's legal costs. The Denver Women's Shelter offered counseling. Strangers stopped me on the street, furious at what had been done to her. But the real victory came at 2 p.m., when Caroline called with news that lifted my entire soul. "Marcus, get down to the courthouse right now," Caroline said, barely hiding her excitement. "Judge Elena Barnes just approved our emergency injunction. Mara gets her house back today." At the Denver County Courthouse, Judge Barnes's voice carried through the packed room. "Based on the medical evidence provided, it is clear that Ms. Mara Porter Prescott was not competent to sign these documents. The property transfer is declared null and void effective immediately." The Prescott family's expensive lawyers looked stunned. Gerald Prescott's face flushed a deep red, while Caleb had to be restrained by court security when he started shouting threats. "Furthermore," Judge Barnes added, "I am issuing a temporary restraining order. The Prescott family is forbidden from contacting or approaching Ms. Porter or her family. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." 2 hours later, I stood on our front porch as Denver police escorted Mara and Lily home. Mara carried a single suitcase, the only belongings the Prescotts had allowed her to keep. Lily clutched a worn teddy bear, her eyes wide as she tried to understand why police officers were helping them. "Mommy," Lily whispered as they climbed the steps. "Are we really going to live here now?" "Yes, baby," Mara said softly, her voice breaking. "We're home. We're finally home." That evening, while we sat around the kitchen table eating Mrs. Alvarez's casserole, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Caleb's number. "Answer it," Caroline said, lifting her own phone to record. "Let's see how reckless he is." I put the call on speaker. Caleb's voice was thick with alcohol and fury. "This war isn't over, old man. You think you won? We're going to destroy all of you. You don't know what we can do." "Are you threatening my family?" I asked, steady. "I'm promising you," he growled. "Enjoy your little victory while you can. Soon you'll wish you never came back from Singapore." He hung up. Caroline ended her recording with a grim smile. "Congratulations, Marcus. He just gave us another felony." That night, as Mara tucked Lily into her own room, I felt something I hadn't felt since returning a week earlier: hope. But Caleb's threats stayed with me. We had won this battle, but the war was far from finished. The first week back in our home felt like walking through a dream I'd been chasing for a decade. Every morning I woke to the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the hall, something this house hadn't heard in far too long. Mara wandered through rooms like she was relearning a forgotten world, pausing in doorways, brushing her fingers over familiar surfaces, letting old memories return. "Dad," she said one morning as she found me making pancakes, "I forgot how good coffee tastes when you're not terrified someone's going to scream at you." Lily slowly warmed to me, her shyness fading as she realized I wasn't leaving again. The breakthrough came on Tuesday afternoon when I found her wrestling with a bicycle clearly too small for her. "Need a hand, sweetheart?" I asked, crouching beside her. She looked up with Mara's determined eyes. "I want to ride like the big kids, but this bike is too baby." That afternoon, we bought her a bright pink bike with training wheels and streamers. The way her face lit up as she pedaled around the driveway made every sacrifice in Singapore feel worth it. I threw myself into repairing the neglected house: loose floorboards, leaking pipes, peeling paint. Small tasks that kept me busy while watching my family heal. Mara surprised me by pitching in. Together, we repainted Lily's room yellow, hung new curtains, and planted flowers in the front yard. "Remember when you taught me to use a drill?" Mara asked one evening as we put together Lily's bookshelf. I was 12, and Mom was sure I'd put a hole straight through the wall. "You did put holes through the wall," I laughed. 3 of them. Your mother made me sleep on the couch for a week." Evenings were the best. Real family meals filled with conversation and laughter instead of tense silence. Lily would chatter about her day, show her drawings, or ask me to read her favorite story about a brave little mouse. "Grandpa," she said one night, the word coming naturally for the first time, "will you read me the mouse story again?" My heart nearly burst. "Of course, sweetheart. As many times as you want." Mara caught my eye and smiled, a real one this time. "Dad," she whispered while we washed dishes, "I forgot what happiness felt like. Thank you for bringing it back." For 10 days, We lived in a warm, fragile bubble. Lily called me Grandpa every day. Mara's bruises faded. The empty look in her eyes began to disappear. We were becoming a real family again. But Thursday night, as I tucked Lily in, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. "Don't answer," Mara said quickly, her worry obvious. But I answered. Caleb's voice was cold, and sober this time, which somehow made it worse. "Enjoying your little reunion, old man? Don't get too comfortable. Some storms hit before you even realize they're coming." He hung up. Lily looked at me, concerned. "Grandpa, who was that? You look scared." I forced a smile and kissed her forehead. "Nobody important, sweetheart. Just a wrong number." But as I turned off her light, the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. Our peaceful days were running out. 2 nights later, a violent thunderstorm swept across Denver, shaking the windows and hammering the house with sheets of rain. I was lying in bed, listening to the wind, when I heard something that didn't belong. Footsteps on the front porch. Slow. Deliberate. I slipped out of bed and looked through the bedroom curtains as lightning flashed across the yard. In that brief burst of light, I saw a figure moving around the edge of our house, carrying what looked like a gas can. A sharp, chemical smell crept through the walls, and my blood ran cold. Caleb had come to make good on his promise. I grabbed my phone and ran into the hallway while dialing 911. I whispered urgently to the dispatcher that a man was trying to burn down our home on Cherry Creek Drive. She told me officers were on the way and ordered me to get my family out immediately. Before I could reach Mara's room, the sound of flames roared to life outside. Orange light flickered through the windows as fire raced along the foundation of the house. Caleb's voice rose above the storm, screaming with the fury of someone who had lost all sanity. "You ruined my family," he howled. "Now I'll ruin yours. Burn it all. Burn everything." I burst into Mara's room and shook her awake. She sat up instantly, fear snapping her into focus. "Lily," she gasped, and we ran together to her daughter's room. Lily was already awake, sitting in bed and crying as smoke drifted under her door. The hallway was filling fast with thick black smoke that clawed at our lungs and burned our eyes. "Mommy, I'm scared," Lily sobbed as Mara scooped her up. "I know, sweetheart. Grandpa's going to get us out," Mara said, her voice trembling. The front door was already blocked by flames, so I pulled them toward the back of the house. But as we reached the kitchen, Caleb appeared at the shattered sliding door, his face twisted with rage and lit by the fire he had set. He held a crowbar in one hand. "Nobody leaves," he shouted, smashing the remaining glass. "If I can't have my family, no one gets to have theirs." I pushed Mara and Lily behind me and grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. "Mara, Lily, get out through the dining room window," I ordered. "I'm not leaving you," Mara cried. "Go," I roared. "Protect Lily." Caleb swung the crowbar at my head, but rage had made him sloppy. I ducked and tackled him around the waist, sending us both crashing into the cabinets. The knife clattered across the floor as we struggled. Smoke billowed through the room as I fought to hold him back. "You want to hurt my family?" I gasped, trying to get leverage. "You'll have to go through me first." Caleb was younger and stronger, but I had 40 years of pent-up fury pushing me forward. Every sleepless night overseas, every tear Mara had cried, every moment of Lily's childhood I had missed, it all surged through me as we fought. Sirens cut through the wind just as I managed to pin Caleb to the floor. Through the broken door, I could see flashing lights as fire trucks and police cars arrived in force. Denver police. Everyone out. I dragged the half-conscious Caleb toward the back door as firefighters burst through the front, spraying water across the burning walls. Outside, in the pounding rain, I spotted Mara and Lily huddled together on the neighbor's lawn. They were soaked, shaking, but alive. Lily ran toward me the second she saw me step out of the smoke. "Grandpa, I thought you were gone." I knelt and wrapped both of them in my arms as paramedics checked us for smoke inhalation and officers secured Caleb in handcuffs. The house was damaged, scorched in places, but it was still standing thanks to the firefighters' quick response. "It's over," I whispered into Mara's hair as we watched them load Caleb into a police car. "He can never hurt you again." 6 months later, I sat in Denver County Court as Judge Elena Barnes delivered the final verdict of our ordeal. The room was packed with supporters who had followed Mara's story from the start. Caleb sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, the arrogance he once carried replaced by a hollow, empty stare. "Mr. Caleb Prescott," Judge Barnes said, her tone firm and unwavering, "you have been found guilty of arson, attempted murder, domestic violence, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Her gavel struck the bench with a sound that felt like justice itself. Caleb didn't react as he was led away in shackles. 2 weeks earlier, Gerald Prescott had been sentenced to 8 years for exploiting a vulnerable adult, fraud, and conspiracy. The Prescott empire collapsed overnight. Their assets were frozen, properties seized, and their name became a symbol of disgrace. Caroline gently squeezed my hand. "It's over, Marcus. They'll never harm anyone again." The restitution ordered by the court was immense. The Prescotts were forced to pay $2 million in damages. Compensation for the stolen home, Mara's unpaid labor, her emotional suffering, and the fire damage. Their mansion, cars, and business holdings were all liquidated to cover what they owed. We used the money to rebuild our lives from scratch. The new house had large windows, a modern kitchen, and a spacious master suite where I moved my belongings from Singapore because I wasn't going anywhere ever again. "Dad," Mara said when I told her I was moving to Denver permanently, "are you sure? You worked so hard over there." "My life isn't in Singapore," I told her. "My life is wherever my family is." The best part of the new house was Lily's backyard playground, with a swing set, a slide, and a sandbox. Every evening I would push her on the swings while Mara tended the flower garden nearby. "Higher, Grandpa," Lily would squeal, her laughter filling the neighborhood. At 5 years old, she had grown into a bright, confident child who knew she was safe and cherished. She called me Grandpa naturally now and insisted I read her the brave little mouse story every night. Mara flourished too. The haunted look was gone, replaced by the spark of the strong woman she used to be. She even enrolled in night classes, working toward a degree in social work. "I want to help other women who went through what I did," she told me. "I want to show them there's always a way forward." That evening, as I pushed Lily on her swing, Mara walked outside carrying 3 glasses of lemonade. She settled on the porch steps, watching us with a warm, radiant smile. Grace slowed her swing and turned to me with a seriousness far beyond her 5 years. "Grandpa," she asked softly, "will you live with us forever and always?" I caught the swing and knelt so we were eye to eye, staring into those familiar brown eyes that reminded me so much of Mara's. "Forever and always, sweetheart," I said. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away." "Dad," Mara called from the porch, her voice thick with emotion, "thank you for saving us. Thank you for never giving up." As the sun dipped behind the Denver rooftops and Grace dashed off to chase fireflies, I realized that this simple, peaceful evening with my family meant more than all the years of success I had built in Singapore. Looking back on everything, I understood just how close I came to losing what mattered most. For 10 years I chased promotions and paychecks while my daughter suffered in silence. I don't want anyone to repeat my mistake. Career achievements mean nothing if your family is hurting while you're gone. This true story taught me something deeper, that God has a way of guiding us home exactly when we're needed. I believe He brought me back to Denver at the very moment my family needed saving. Sometimes what seems like coincidence is actually divine intervention. The Prescott family thought they could take advantage of a vulnerable woman without ever facing consequences. They forgot that God sees everything. Justice always finds a way through. Mara's strength through those 3 painful years showed me that faith can carry us through trials we never thought we could survive. These grandpa stories aren't really about me. They're about the unbreakable bonds that hold families together. The moment I saw Lily hiding behind her mother, afraid of her own grandfather, I understood the heavy price of my absence. But love has a way of repairing even the deepest wounds. If you're working far from home, remember this. No amount of money can replace the moments you miss with your children and grandchildren. Success feels empty when your family is suffering in silence. This true story could have ended in tragedy if I had arrived even a few weeks later. The real blessing wasn't the court victory or the rebuilt home. It was Lily calling me Grandpa, with genuine affection in her voice. These grandpa stories remind us that being present is the greatest gift we can ever give our families. That's why I continue sharing them, to encourage other grandfathers to focus on what truly matters. Don't wait for a crisis to bring you home. Don't assume your loved ones are okay simply because they stay quiet. And never underestimate a parent's love when their child is in danger. This story changed all our lives. Mara rediscovered her strength. Lily learned she was safe. And I realized that home isn't a house. It's the people who love you without conditions. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your own experiences in the comments. And remember to subscribe for more true stories that honor the power of family love. Your story might be the message someone else desperately needs today. On Christmas morning, my son Aaron called and said, "Dad, maybe he should just stay home this year." He meant my 19-year-old son, Daniel, my autistic boy. I didn't argue with him. I simply said, "I understand," and hung up. That evening, Daniel and I created our own quiet Christmas together. By nightfall, my phone was buzzing non-stop, 25 missed calls. I had no idea that our simple decision would soon become the story that changed everything. I'm grateful you're here listening. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? The smell of cinnamon rolls filled our little house on Cedar Avenue as Christmas morning light streamed through the kitchen windows. I stood at the counter and watched my 19-year-old son Daniel's fingers drift effortlessly across the old upright piano we'd moved into the living room years ago. His autism often made the world overwhelming, but when he sat at that piano, everything seemed to fall into place. Daniel had been awake since dawn. It wasn't the gifts under the tree that excited him, it was the music. He'd already played 3 different arrangements of White Christmas, each one more beautiful than the last. His gift wasn't just playing notes. He could transform any melody into something uniquely his. "That's beautiful, son," I called out, brushing flour from my hands. At 59, I'd learned to cherish these quiet, gentle moments. It had been 4 years since my wife, Grace, passed away, and during that time Daniel and I had been learning to navigate life together in our old Denver home. Some days were harder than others, but mornings like this made me feel like we were doing just fine. The phone rang just as Daniel shifted into a jazz version of Silent Night. I almost let it go to voicemail. Christmas calls usually meant obligations we didn't have the energy for, and we'd planned for a peaceful day at home. But when I saw Aaron's name, I picked up. "Morning, Dad," he said, using that careful tone he always slipped into whenever Daniel was mentioned. "Merry Christmas, Aaron. How are Clara and Olivia?" "They're good. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about tonight." He paused, and I could hear voices in the background. Probably Clara's family gathering for their big Christmas dinner. Then he said the words I'd been dreading. "Maybe he should just stay home this year." Not Daniel. Not your brother. Just he. And the meaning behind it cut straight to the bone. The careful politeness in Aaron's voice somehow made everything even worse, as if he were discussing a minor scheduling issue rather than excluding his own brother from Christmas. I glanced across the room at Daniel, completely absorbed in his music, unaware that his existence was being debated like an inconvenience. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he leaned into a particularly challenging passage, his whole body swaying gently to a rhythm only he could feel. "I understand," I said quietly. And I did. I understood that my older son was ashamed of his brother. I understood that Daniel's stimmying and occasional outbursts made Aaron uncomfortable around his in-laws. I understood that it was easier for him to exclude than to educate, easier to hide his brother than to defend him. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd get it. Maybe we can do something next week. Just us. Just us." The words hung in the quiet kitchen like a bitter taste I couldn't get rid of. Daniel looked up from the piano, his eyes bright with the joy that music always brought him. "Dad, do you want to hear the song I wrote for Mom?" he asked. My chest tightened. Every Christmas, he composed something new for Grace and played it to her framed photo on the mantel. I knew this year's piece would be beautiful and aching and full of love. And I knew it would be wasted on an empty house if I followed Aaron's plan. I walked over and sat beside him on the piano bench, the same place where Grace used to sit during his evening concerts. He looked at me with hope. "Are we going to have Christmas dinner with Aaron tonight?" he asked softly. The question lingered between us. I could lie and protect him, pretend everything was fine, or I could choose something different. "You know what, Daniel?" I said finally. "We'll make our own Christmas." His entire face lit up with a pure, childlike joy that reminded me why I'd fight the whole world for him. By 3 that afternoon, I had made up my mind. Daniel deserved better than being hidden away because his brother was embarrassed. I grabbed my coat and turned to him. "Get your jacket, son. We're going out." The Riverside Community Center was only a few blocks from our home, a modest brick building that hosted everything from senior yoga to kids' birthday parties. I remembered our neighbor, Helen Martinez, mentioning a Christmas potluck for people spending the holiday alone. It seemed like the perfect place for our own Christmas celebration. Helen's face glowed when she saw us walk through the doors. "Mr. Porter, Daniel, I'm so glad you came," she said. She wore a bright red sweater with a reindeer whose antlers jingled, and her smile felt warmer than any formal family dinner ever could. The main hall buzzed with soft conversation. About 30 people wandered between tables covered with mismatched dishes, homemade casseroles, store-bought cookies, and someone's famous green bean salad. These weren't polished, judgmental guests. They were real people. Widows spending their first holiday alone, single parents on tight budgets, students far from home. Daniel stayed close to me at first, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar voices and the carols playing softly from a portable speaker. But Helen had a way of making people feel safe. "Daniel, I remember your mom telling me you play piano," she said gently. "We've got an old upright in the corner if you want to try it. No pressure, only if you feel like it." He glanced toward the corner where a worn piano sat under strings of twinkling lights. A small poinsettia rested on top, and sheet music lay scattered across the bench. That familiar spark lit his eyes. "It's okay if you want to play," I told him. He walked to the piano like he was greeting an old friend. His fingers pressed a few keys, testing the sound, adjusting to the slightly flat middle C. Then, without warning, he began. What started as Silent Night transformed into something entirely new. Daniel wove jazz harmonies with gentle improvisation, layering melodies that wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. Conversation faded. Forks hovered in midair. Even the children stopped playing. When his final note drifted away, the quiet lingered for a long, still moment. Then applause erupted, deep, sincere, and full of awe. "That was incredible," whispered Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor I'd seen walking her dog countless times. "Just beautiful." Helen had tears in her eyes. "Daniel, that was a gift. A real Christmas gift." I realized she'd been holding her phone up. Something told me she'd caught more than just a performance. As we helped clean up afterward, people approached Daniel with real kindness. Not pity. Not confusion. Just appreciation for what he'd shared. We walked home beneath the streetlights while Daniel hummed his arrangement, snow falling lightly around us. For the first time all day, I felt at peace with our decision. That peace lasted until we stepped inside and I saw my phone blinking. 25 missed calls. I woke up on Boxing Day to my phone buzzing non-stop. It was only 7:30 a.m., and notifications were piling up faster than I could read them. Facebook tags, text messages, voicemails. My phone hadn't stopped since the night before. Helen had posted the video. "Christmas Miracle Boy." She'd added a simple caption. "Sometimes the most beautiful gifts come from the most beautiful hearts." This young man made our Christmas unforgettable. The numbers were staggering. 50,000 views overnight. 1,000 shares. 500 comments. And more incoming every second. "This made me cry at work," wrote Jennifer from Ohio. "What a gift," commented a music teacher in Portland. "Such a beautiful soul. This is what Christmas should feel like." I scrolled through message after message, my coffee untouched and cooling. Parents of autistic children shared their stories. Musicians praised Daniel's natural talent. Strangers simply thanked him for bringing joy into their day. By noon, The video had jumped platforms. Someone had uploaded it to TikTok, where it blew up again. YouTube compilations appeared with titles like, "Autistic Teen's Christmas Piano Performance Will Restore Your Faith." The hashtag Christmas Miracle Boy was suddenly everywhere. First in Denver, then all across Colorado, and by noon, it was trending nationwide. Around 10 a.m., Daniel wandered sleepily into the kitchen, completely unaware of the digital tidal wave forming around him. "Morning, Dad. Can we have pancakes?" "Sure, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady just as my phone rang for what felt like the 12th time. This time it was Channel 7 News. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Maria Rodriguez from Denver 7. We'd love to feature your son's beautiful performance. Would you be available for an interview?" An interview. On television. About Daniel. I looked at my boy, humming yesterday's arrangement while stirring pancake batter, blissfully unaware that millions of people were sharing his music, calling him a miracle, praising him across the country. To Daniel, it was simply another morning, another song. "I'll need to think about it," I told the reporter. But the calls kept coming. The Denver Post. Good Morning Colorado. Podcasts. Radio stations. Even a talent agent from Los Angeles who somehow found my number. "Dad, why is your phone so noisy?" Daniel asked, covering his ears as the phone buzzed again. "People liked your music, son," I said gently. "They really, really liked it." His whole face glowed with innocent joy. "That's nice. Can I play more songs for them?" The purity of it nearly broke me. The whole world was celebrating Daniel's gift while his own brother had wanted to tuck him away like an inconvenience. The irony wasn't subtle. Strangers were honoring what family had rejected. By evening, I had given 3 phone interviews and declined a dozen more. The story had already spread beyond Colorado. Christmas Miracle Boy now had more than 2 million tags. Videos of Daniel were being shared globally, on accounts written in languages I couldn't even identify. I was scrolling through heartfelt messages when my phone rang with a familiar number. "Aaron. Dad, we need to talk." His voice was softer than usual, still careful, but it wasn't cold. "I'm listening." "We saw the video." Everyone saw the video. Clara got calls all day from friends asking about Daniel. He hesitated. "Maybe we made a mistake yesterday." 10 days later, Aaron called again with an invitation I wasn't expecting. "Dad, it's Olivia's birthday this weekend. She asked specifically if Grandpa and Uncle Daniel could come. Clara and I talked, and we'd really like you both there." No mention of the viral video. No acknowledgement of Christmas morning. Just a simple, normal invitation. I looked outside where Daniel was building a snowman, laughing as he packed snow between his mittened hands. Interview requests from 3 more stations had come in that morning, but we declined all of them. Daniel didn't want fame. He just wanted to be himself. "You sure about this, Aaron?" "Yes, Dad. Olivia's excited. She wants Uncle Daniel to play Happy Birthday for her on the piano." Saturday afternoon, Daniel and I stood on the doorstep of Aaron's house in Highlands Ranch, a polished suburban palace with balloons tied to the mailbox and high-end cars lining the circular drive. Clara opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Sullivan, Daniel, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice overly bright, the way people sound when hosting a party they're not sure they want. "But Olivia." She came running full speed, throwing her arms around my legs. "Grandpa, you came. And Uncle Daniel." She grabbed Daniel's hand with zero hesitation, pulling him toward the backyard while excitedly talking about her new bike and the chocolate cake. The yard was filled with families from Clara's country club circle. Parents dressed in subtle luxury, kids in coordinated outfits. They smiled politely when we walked up, but I caught the sideways glances. I heard the whispers when Daniel hummed softly to himself. "He's the one from the video," someone murmured. For the first hour, everything went better than I expected. Daniel joined the kids' games, his gentle nature winning them over. Olivia appointed herself as tour guide, introducing him proudly to her friends as my super cool uncle who plays piano like magic. Then came lunch. The main table was set beautifully. Matching plates, cloth napkins, winter centerpieces. Enough seats for everyone. Everyone except Daniel. I set up a quiet spot for Daniel, Clara said quickly, pointing toward the kitchen. Someplace he'll be more comfortable. You know, away from the noise. I looked where she pointed. In the kitchen, at the breakfast counter, sat a single plastic chair. A paper plate. A juice box. Hidden. Separate. My stomach dropped like a stone. You're hiding him, I said, my voice trembling. You're hiding him like he's something shameful. Aaron stepped forward, hands raised in that familiar dismissive gesture. Dad, some of the other parents might not understand. Their kids have never been around someone like Daniel. We thought this would be easier for everyone. Easier for who? I snapped. I grabbed Daniel's hand, fury trembling through me. You haven't learned anything. Not one thing. Grandpa. Olivia's small voice cracked the moment. She stood in the doorway, eyes full of tears. Why is Grandpa leaving? Did I do something wrong? My heart broke for her, but I couldn't stay. Not when my own son still treated Daniel like an embarrassment to be managed rather than a member of the family. In the car, Daniel stared out the window quietly until he finally asked, "Did I mess up the party, Dad?" "No, son. You didn't do anything wrong." But as I drove home through the cold January afternoon, one thought echoed with perfect clarity. They weren't ever going to see Daniel as anything but a burden. It was time to stop waiting for them to change. Sunday morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If they wouldn't accept Daniel, we'd find people who would. "Danny, how would you feel about an adventure?" I asked over breakfast, watching his whole face brighten at the word. "What kind of adventure, Dad?" "The musical kind," I said. "Pack your bags, son. We're going to Nashville." Within 2 hours, our old Honda Civic was loaded with everything we needed. Daniel's portable keyboard, my worn-out camera, a week's worth of clothes, and a cooler filled with sandwiches the way Grace used to make them for our family road trips. Daniel bounced in the passenger seat, more excited than I'd seen him since Christmas morning. The 12-hour drive gave us something we hadn't had in months. Long, uninterrupted time together. Daniel sang along to every song on the radio, his voice sliding into harmonies no one else would think to find. Somewhere outside Kansas City, he started composing lyrics about highway signs and truck stops, turning our mundane drive into a musical adventure. "Dad, look at the clouds," he said, pointing toward the sky. "They look like piano keys." I followed his gaze and smiled. Only Daniel could find music in a gray January sky. We rolled into Nashville on Tuesday evening, neon lights shimmering on the Cumberland River. Broadway pulsed with honky-tonk music spilling from every doorway. Street performers played guitars on corners while tourists posed for photos under glowing signs. "It's so loud," Daniel said, covering his ears as we walked past the crowds. "We'll find somewhere quieter," I promised. Wednesday morning brought us to Centennial Park, where a weathered upright piano stood beneath a pavilion. Part of Nashville's Play Me, I'm Yours project. Only a few joggers passed through the quiet space, leaving it mostly ours. "Want to try it out?" I asked. Daniel approached the piano like greeting an old friend. His fingers explored the keys, and soon Amazing Grace transformed into something that belonged in the Tennessee hills. The melody kept its heart, but he added country twists, small bends, a gospel run here, a soft slide there. A jogger stopped to listen. Then a couple walking their dog. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered. Phones came out as Daniel played, unaware he was holding an audience in the palm of his hand. "Kid's got real talent," said a man in a cowboy hat who introduced himself as a session musician. "Y'all visiting?" "Denver," I replied, watching Daniel lose himself in the music. "We're on a musical journey." When he finished, the applause felt genuine and warm. Someone dropped a 20 into his keyboard case. A grandmother asked for his autograph. A teenager requested Sweet Caroline, and Daniel delivered a country-inspired version that had everyone singing along. That evening, I posted our first video, Danny and Dad's Musical Journey, Day 1. Just simple footage of Daniel at the piano, Nashville's skyline behind him, strangers becoming friends through the language of music. The response was immediate. 100,000 views in 2 hours. Comments pouring in from every time zone. "Where are you going next?" asked someone from Australia. "Following your journey," wrote a teacher from Maine. "More cities, please," begged a viewer from Texas. I looked at Daniel curled on the hotel bed reading a book about famous pianists, completely unaware that the world was beginning to follow him. Tomorrow we would head south to New Orleans. Tonight, for the first time in months, it felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be. From Nashville, we drove south like wandering musicians chasing melodies across the map. New Orleans greeted us with jazz pouring from every doorway in the French Quarter. Daniel found a street piano at Jackson Square, where musicians had gathered for decades. Within hours, he was jamming with a trumpet player named Marcus and a drummer called Big Joe, the three of them creating an impromptu trio powerful enough to stop foot traffic. "Kid plays like he's been doing this since birth," Marcus said, shaking his head as Daniel built complex jazz harmonies around a simple melody. The video I posted that evening, "Danny Plays Jazz in NOLA," exploded bigger than anything before. 500,000 views overnight. Comments in French and other languages I couldn't even identify. The hashtag Chasers, Danny and Dad, was trending internationally. Memphis came next. Beale Street's blues legacy called to Daniel like a magnet. In Handy Park, he sat at another public piano and reinvented traditional blues. The crowd there was different, older, wiser, people who had heard real blues all their lives. After Daniel finished a haunting version of Summertime, an elderly man with watery eyes pressed a weathered harmonica into Daniel's hand. "For luck, son. You've got the gift." Chicago's Millennium Park became its own classroom. The classical setting pushed Daniel to attempt Chopin, and his interpretation stopped businessmen mid-stride. Phones forgotten, conversations halted. They simply listened, captivated by the boy coaxing concert hall beauty out of a weathered public piano. Each city taught Daniel something new. New Orleans gave him jazz. Memphis gave him blues and soul. Chicago gave him classical sharpness. He absorbed it all like water. Our followers grew from thousands to millions. Fan mail arrived at hotels we booked the night before. Major networks reached out. Donation offers rolled in, all politely declined. But the real magic lived in the quiet moments. Daniel and me sharing beignet in a New Orleans cafe, him humming new melodies as I drove through the night, hotel rooms where he practiced quietly with headphones while I answered emails from strangers touched by his music. "Dad, I like this adventure," he said one evening in Chicago, staring out at the glowing skyline. "People here understand my music." "They understand you, son," I told him softly. "The real you." For the first time in his 19 years, Daniel was being seen, not as someone to accommodate or explain, but as someone to celebrate. His confidence bloomed, and my heart felt too full for my chest. Then came the call that changed everything. "Mr. Sullivan," a voice said when I answered. "This is Frederick Harrison from Carnegie Hall." He sat at his keyboard, the same small smile he always had when someone asked him to play. He placed his fingers on the keys and began the gentle, glowing melody he'd created on that quiet Christmas night at the community center. The notes floated through the hotel room and spilled into the live stream like soft light, steady and full of innocence. The chat exploded. "He's incredible. I'm crying. Protect this family at all costs. This boy is a blessing." By the time Danny finished, more than 40,000 people were watching. I let the music fade completely before I spoke again. "This is who my son really is," I said quietly. "Not an inconvenience. Not a burden. Not someone to hide. He is my pride. My joy. And I won't let anyone, family or stranger, take him away from me ever again." The comments flew across the screen in a blur of support, outrage, love, and gratitude. For the first time since the attacks had begun, I felt the weight on my chest lift. The truth had finally been spoken out loud, and the world heard it. The stream lasted another hour. I answered questions. Danny played more songs, small pieces, improvisations, fragments of works in progress. People adored him. They begged for updates about Carnegie Hall. They sent messages of anger toward the people who tried to tear us down. They reassured us that we weren't alone. When I finally ended the live video, my notifications exploded instantly. Helen had called 10 times. My sister left a tearful voicemail apologizing for ever doubting us. Complete strangers sent emails offering legal help, travel support, and safe housing if we ever needed it. But there was one message I couldn't ignore. A text from a number I knew by heart. Aaron. I saw the live stream. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was getting this bad. Please call me. Please. I set the phone down slowly. Danny sat cross-legged on the bed, humming softly as he sorted through sheet music. His world was still simple, still filled with melodies and wonder. Mine had just been turned upside down. The next morning, as we packed to leave Chicago for New York, my phone pinged again. It was a message from the Colorado Department of Human Services. Your case has been reviewed. Based on new public information, all concerns regarding Daniel Sullivan's welfare have been closed. No further action will be taken. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. The truth had saved us. The world had stood up for us. And nobody, not even my own family, would ever be able to twist that narrative again. Dad, Daniel asked, zipping his coat. Is it time to go to New York? It is, son, I said, pulling him into a hug. It's time to go play for people who love your music. Danny smiled. Then let's go. I'm ready. And with that, we walked out of the hotel room, father and son, partners on a journey that had begun in silence and now echoed across the world. He placed his hands over the keyboard and began Silent Night, the same arrangement that started everything, yet somehow richer and even more beautiful now. The melody drifted through the hotel room while 50,000 people watched in absolute silence. When he finished, the chat burst open with emotion. I'm crying. That was breathtaking. Justice for Daniel. Shame on that family. This is why we travel, I said as Daniel continued playing softly. This is why we perform. Because he deserves a world that sees his worth. And if his own family won't give him that world, then we'll find it ourselves. The live stream ended with more than 50,000 viewers and thousands of shares erupting across the internet. The truth had finally broken through the lies, and once it was out, no one, not family, not strangers, not institutions, could force it back into the shadows. For the first time since the coordinated attacks began, I felt my lungs fill fully, as if I'd been drowning for weeks and had finally surfaced. Yet even in that moment of relief, a quiet dread lingered beneath the surface, whispering that peace never lasts long, not when powerful people feel cornered. The aftermath arrived like a storm with no warning. By morning, the story had detonated across every major platform, each share acting like another flash of lightning. Justice for Daniel wasn't just trending, it was everywhere, from parenting forums to entertainment pages to international news feeds. Support poured in, but so did consequences, swift and brutal, especially back in Denver. Aaron's marketing firm received a flood of complaints from clients saying they refused to work with a company that employed someone who abandoned his disabled brother. One email read, "We don't trust people who hide their own family members to protect their image." Within days, Aaron's co-workers avoided him in hallways. Within a week, he was quietly placed on indefinite leave, his perfect life beginning to crumble. Clara didn't escape the fallout either. Her country club group, the same circle she clung to for validation, stopped returning messages. Parents at Olivia's school whispered during pickup time, staring at her like a scandal she couldn't outrun. The polished suburban facade they had built, the one they'd guarded by pushing Daniel out of sight, shattered almost instantly. And once the cracks appeared, there was no patching them. Meanwhile, the Colorado Department of Human Services called me with a tone so different it was almost jarring. "Mr. Sullivan," the caseworker said, her voice now careful instead of accusatory, "after reviewing the evidence and interviewing witnesses, we're closing this case. There is no sign of abuse, and overwhelming evidence of appropriate care." The investigation that had kept me awake at night, the threat of losing Daniel, evaporated in a single breath. Relief washed through me, but so did anger at how close we had come to disaster simply because someone wanted to hurt us. Then, amid the chaos, hope arrived again, this time dressed in elegance. Carnegie Hall confirmed Daniel's Valentine's Day performance with genuine excitement. "We're honored to host him," Frederick told me. "This is exactly what our stage is meant for." His words echoed in my chest long after the call ended. For Daniel, this wasn't just a concert. It was a declaration that the world finally saw what I'd always seen. February 14th dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter morning that felt like a blank page waiting to be written on. When we walked into Carnegie Hall, Daniel stared in stunned silence at the red velvet seats and the shimmering gold ceiling. "It looks like a music box," he whispered, awe softening every syllable. The theater was sold out, 2,000 people waiting, breath held, for a young man who used to play in public parks for strangers who happened to pass by. Backstage, Daniel warmed up with the same peaceful focus he always carried. No nerves. No fear. Just music. He had no idea that the world beyond those curtains was holding its breath for him. And when he stepped onto the stage, something happened that even I couldn't have prepared for. The audience rose to their feet before he even touched the keys. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Daniel blinked, confused, then quietly sat down and placed his hands on the piano. He began with Silent Night, soft and pure. Then he moved into Amazing Grace, the notes flowing like a river. Finally, he shifted into his original piece, Journey Home, a composition shaped from the cities we'd traveled through, the people who had loved him, the storms we'd endured. Each note felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. The music filled every corner of the hall, rising to the balcony and sweeping through the aisles. In that moment, I watched 2,000 people discover the truth I'd always known. Daniel was never less. He was extraordinary. When the final note dissolved into silence, the audience didn't move. Then, slowly at first, applause swelled, growing louder and louder until it became a roar. People cried openly. Some held their hands over their hearts. The standing ovation lasted 10 full minutes, long enough for Daniel to look at me backstage afterward, eyes shining with wonder as he stepped into my arms. He hugged me tightly, his voice warm against my shoulder. "Dad, did I do good?" But before I could answer, a sudden knock echoed on the backstage door, sharp, urgent, and out of place in the middle of our triumph. I turned, heart hitching. The stage manager's pale face appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Sullivan," he whispered, glancing behind him nervously. "There's someone here asking for you, and you need to see this." The celebration froze around us, suspended in the air like a held breath. Something was waiting beyond that door, and I could feel in my bones that whatever it was, our journey wasn't finished yet. "Dad, are you happy?" "Yes, son," I said, holding him close. "We're free." 6 months later, we settled into a gentle rhythm, a life shaped around performances in venues that welcomed Daniel's talent, a small apartment in Nashville where he could play freely, a community of musicians and autism families who embraced him exactly as he was. Helen visited often, bringing cookies and updates from Denver. "Everyone knows you made the right choice," she said softly. "Even people who used to ask nosy questions have changed after watching Daniel succeed." She hesitated. "Aaron lost his job. Clara barely leaves the house. And Olivia, she asks about you both all the time." I felt a pang for my granddaughter, but not for the choices her parents had made. That evening, Daniel worked on a new composition inspired by the Nashville skyline. I watched him play and reflected on everything we'd gone through. Sometimes you have to leave to find your real home. Sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you were born into. "Dad, I'm glad we went on our adventure," Daniel said suddenly, looking up from the keyboard. "Me too, son. Me too." Outside our window, Nashville pulsed with life, every street carrying its own melody. The city hummed with guitars, footsteps, laughter, and the soft echo of voices drifting from bars we'd never step inside. Somewhere out there, a lone street musician was playing for strangers and dreamers, pouring his heart into the night the same way Daniel did. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside me, an understanding that we had finally found our place. These people didn't look at Daniel and see a limitation. They saw something rare, something luminous, something the world desperately needed, even if it didn't always know it. Looking back, I realized none of this happened by accident. God had been steering us long before I understood what was happening. When Aaron made that Christmas morning call, the one that sliced straight through me, I thought our world was coming apart at the seams. The rejection felt sharp enough to break something permanent. But now I see that moment differently. What I thought was the shattering of our family was really the breaking of the chains that kept us tied to people who never saw Daniel clearly. Sometimes God lets a door slam so loudly it forces you to turn around and notice the one He's been holding open behind you all along. Don't make the mistake I made for so many years, waiting for people to change when they never intended to. I spent too long hoping that love would magically grow in the hearts of those who had already shown me who they were. I excused their behavior, softened their words, and convinced myself that patience would fix everything. But patience doesn't heal willful blindness. And love can't bloom in soil where seeds were never planted. The truth is simple but brutal. Some people will never see your child's magic because they refuse to look. Daniel was never the burden they painted him to be. He was the blessing they were too blind to appreciate. And in the places where blood family failed, strangers stepped forward with open arms. In Nashville, people listened to him with awe. In New Orleans, seasoned musicians treated him like an equal. In Chicago, businessmen stopped mid-stride because they couldn't believe the sound coming from a public piano. These people, these complete strangers, became the family we were meant to find. God placed them in our path at the exact moments we needed them most, guiding us city by city, note by note, until we reached the life we had been searching for all along. If you're living a story anything like ours, hear me now, you are not alone. There are countless grandfathers, parents, and guardians out there fighting battles no one else sees. There are families choosing love over convenience, protection over approval, truth over silence. There are grandpa stories like ours unfolding quietly in kitchens, hospitals, and long midnight drives. Stories of courage that don't make headlines but reshape entire lives. Stories of people who stand tall when the world tries to push them down. The greatest lesson I ever learned came wrapped in heartbreak. Sometimes you must walk away from the people you always believed would walk with you. And that is not failure. It's survival. God never calls us to endure mistreatment just because it comes from someone who shares our blood. He calls us to protect the vulnerable, to love fiercely, and to build safe places where the people we cherish can grow without fear. Letting go is not abandonment. Letting go is choosing peace over poison. Daniel and I found our freedom the moment we stopped waiting for acceptance from people who had none to give. The moment we stepped away from their shadows, the world revealed itself to be far kinder than we expected. We discovered a community overflowing with compassion. People who listened, who understood, who celebrated Daniel for the brilliance he carries inside him. The journey wasn't easy, but it led us straight to the hearts we were meant to find. If you're searching for your tribe, don't stop. They're out there. People who will see your child's worth instantly, people who will love without being asked, people who will stand beside you when the world feels cold. Be brave enough to walk away from those who refuse to see the light you're protecting. Because somewhere out there, beyond the pain, beyond the rejection, beyond the fear, is a place where you and your child will finally breathe freely. And when you find it, you'll wonder why you ever thought you had to settle for less. Don't wait for permission to love your child fully. Don't apologize for their differences. Celebrate them. Protect them. And trust that something beautiful is waiting ahead for both of you. These true stories matter because they show us what's possible when we choose love over fear. Your true story matters, too. Share it in the comments below. Has someone in your family ever surprised you with unexpected acceptance or heartbreaking rejection? Hit that subscribe button if this story touched your heart. And please share it with anyone who needs to hear they're not alone.